When someone is feeling vulnerable, it can affect their behavior in any number of ways. For example, it could show up as fear, or anger, or distrust. If we want to effectively de-escalate emotion and make someone feel safe enough to trust us, which we do, we have to address this vulnerability directly. One of the ways we can do this is by increasing the predictability of the conversation. Enter the signpost.
Hello.
In this video, we're going to look at 6 different ways to use signposts to raise the predictability of your conversation and therefore build trust rapidly in any difficult conversation. Let's get into it. The first signpost is something I refer to as setting the agenda. Setting the agenda just means being really clear about what it is you want to talk about right at the start of the conversation. For example, hey, is it okay if we talk about what happened at work yesterday? It's a bit like the big welcome to wherever sign that you pass as you're entering into a new town. It lets the person know the general territory that you want to traverse in your conversation. When you need to broach a kind of tricky topic, it's really very tempting to dilly-dally and beat around the bush and leave the other person wondering what it is you want to talk about. Please don't do that. If you start orienting them to the nature of the conversation right from the very beginning, and there's less chance that they'll be caught off guard by anything that comes up. The second kind of signpost that I want to talk about is something that I'm just going to call the standard signpost. Standard signposts are like the street signs of the conversation. They're a bit like setting the agenda, except it's more like you're setting lots of micro agendas for each little section of the conversation. For example, in my work as a doctor, I'll signpost my way through the consultation. I'm going to ask you some questions about your past medical history now. So what we'll do is this. First, I'll talk to you about what I think might be going on, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do about it. The third kind of signpost that I want to talk about is called asking permission. Asking permission is like a standard signpost plus empowerment. When you ask permission about where to take the conversation next, you do 2 things simultaneously. Firstly, you make your intentions clear, and secondly, you empower the other person to decide if they're okay with that. Now, of course, if you ask permission for something, you need to be prepared for them to say, no, I don't want to talk about that. In my experience, though, this is rarely the case. Most people feel empowered and more inclined to talk about something when you ask their permission. The fourth kind of signpost I want to talk about is something I'm just going to call the parking lot. Parking lot signposts can be used to pivot away from unproductive topics to more urgent or more important lines of inquiry. In this case, it works well to precede the signpost with some appreciation and to ask permission as part of the pivot. Look, thank you so much for sharing that information. It sounds like you have a really important concern there that we need to cover in detail. Is it okay if we come back to it after we've finished dealing with what's happened in these latest developments? You can use signposts in this way to park side topics as they arise. The other person feels heard because you've shown them that you've actually heard them, but your objective is not derailed. The fifth signpost I want to talk about is the warning shot. The warning shot is a really important kind of signpost, especially when we have to break bad news. Warning shots are important because they allow the other person to start preparing their mind for an important change in their understanding of the world. Something in their world is about to change, possibly something massive. So the more that you can ease them into that change, the less traumatizing it will be for them. Look, I need to have a serious conversation with you. Look, I am really sorry, but I have some really difficult news to share with you. Sometimes it's actually valuable to drop multiple warning shots before you break the news itself. Using words like I'm worried, or I'm concerned, or this is really serious. These can also serve as sort of micro warning shots for this purpose. The sixth and final signpost that I want to talk to you about is something we're just going to call the skilled interruption. The literature on communication skills generally recommends against interrupting people, but there are exceptions to every rule. And the fact is, sometimes, with some people, you just need to interrupt.
My brother Bradley and I used to always pretend that we were the Wonder Twins. He would always become form of a dragon, and then I would want to be a dragon too, but he said I'd be something made of water, so I'd be like, shape of an ice dragon. And then he would say that I was copying him, and he'd breathe on me, and I'd have to melt, but it was still so awesome.
That's funny. I don't recall asking for a really boring story. My God, Barbie. Don't you understand no one cares?
One way to skillfully interrupt without losing rapport is to signpost that you're doing it as you do it. It might sound something like this. Jerry, I am so sorry. I need to interrupt you. Look, this sounds like a really important area that we need to cover in more detail. Is it okay if we come back to it after we've finished dealing with these latest developments? Now notice how we built on the parking lot signpost to pivot back to the topic of our choosing. In this way, you're simultaneously able to get the conversation back on track, and you've disarmed the other person of any offense they might feel at the interruption by actually accusing yourself of that offense right at the outset. Now, did I say there's going to be 6? I've actually got 7, so here's an extra one. The 7th signpost is something I'm just going to call I'm going to be rude now. It's actually helpful to use a signpost whenever you're about to say something that could be even just interpreted as rude. For example, I'm going to ask you some really direct questions now. Or, look, I'm going to give you my opinion on that now. In the same way that signposts support a skillful interruption, signposting that you're about to be rude serves to disarm the other person of any offense that they might feel about what you're about to say. Amazingly, you might even find that the other person actually comes to your defense in these situations. No problem, you got to do your job. Well, there's no point beating around the bush, is there? Now keep in mind that this isn't actually an excuse to be rude. The way I think about it is that, there are some things that we have to say that can be interpreted as rude or effectively misinterpreted. So these are the sort of things that I might sort of preempt with a I'm about to be rude signpost. Now don't be fooled by the simplicity of the signpost. Signposting is an indispensable skill that allows you to simultaneously move through the structure of any conversation towards your chosen objective and at the same time build your relationship with the other person. But of course, signposts can't be used in isolation. These are skills that sit alongside a bunch of other important trust building skills that form your toolbox for difficult conversations. So if you want to add another skill to your emotional intelligence toolbox right now, you should check this video out right here. Now, in case you hadn't noticed, I am a little bit obsessed with communication skills, but it's because I think they're really important. If you'd like to help me spread this message, if you'd like to help me bring these kind of skills to more and more people, what would really help is subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and even adding a comment in the comment section below. I will see you in the next video.